Hello, everyone, my friends. Welcome to the weekly show of What is School For? My name is AI. I'm the host of this weekly live streaming show. You can also listen to us on the traditional audio only podcast. Just search What is School For? On this show, I interview leading educators, education professionals, teachers, students, traditional and non-traditional students, and parents, business leaders, entrepreneurs to come here to discuss, debate, and disrupt education. Our goal is to future-proof the next generation. And today we are talking about future leaders and how to raise future leaders and what parents need to know. Join me live is another doctor, really honored, is Dr. Nanette Miner. And Nanette and we are going to discuss ways for parents and to raise future leaders and what you need to know. For those of you who are not familiar with Nanette, she is the founder of the Training Doctor, and she has been running her company for almost 3 decades. Really impressive. And her company has worked with quite a few big name brands such as GE, HBO, Marriott, Verizon, Merck, and Citibank, and many other household name brands. And Nanette is also a speaker, an author, and her doctorate is actually in learning how people learn. So really fascinating. And you are going to walk away from today's interview with a much better understanding of what are the critical skills and the qualities in future leaders. And of course, we're also going to talk about education, to what extent and in what aspect the current education model is or not preparing our children to be future leaders. So make sure you stay for the entire interview. And we are live on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitch, on Periscope, and on YouTube, on all the places. I see that quite a few of you are already here. Let me know in the comment section where you are joining us live from, social media wise and geographically speaking. So nice to see you all. And Nanette, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks now.
Yeah, likewise. So I want to ask you, I remember when you and I first connected on LinkedIn, and you told me something that was just like, wow, stuck with me. You said that you are the most educated person who is against education. And I love this because this is my language, right? I have a doctorate, you have a doctorate. It is so interesting. Both of us, we have earned our terminal degrees, but we're both against the traditional education. So, but I do want you to explain, what do you mean by that? Why are you against education?
Yes, I do say that a lot. I don't use it as a blanket statement. I say to people, I am probably the most educated person you know who's against education. I don't want to say I am the most educated person. But I found you via LinkedIn because of someone that we're mutually connected to. And I saw your belief system and I immediately contacted you privately and said, oh my gosh, we're kindred spirits. I feel the same way. I just feel that higher education is one path, and for some reason, it is a path that we have brainwashed a lot of people into believing is the only path. And so I'm not thrilled with that perspective. I mean, I kind of like the results of the pandemic. I just saw on the news yesterday, I can't cite the source, but I saw that freshman entry for four-year colleges is down 16% this semester.
I read the same article. Yeah.
Not great for those colleges, and I empathize with them, but I'm glad that somebody shook it up and said, there's other ways that you can educate yourself. You don't have to go through a 4-year degree. You don't have to go through this lock-stepped process. I know when my own kids were going to college, they were adamant that they were going to go to a 4-year school first. And I kept saying, try a 2-year school first. And if you like school or not, if it's something that you do like, then you can go on. There's a lot of pressure for younger people to follow this path to success, which I don't see we have a whole lot of proof that it is a path to success. It's a path to debt. It's a path to delaying life experiences. But I mean, like in my own case, I mean, I've been self-employed since I was 25 years old. I got my doctorate after I was in business for, I think, 5 or 8 years at that point. There was no need for me to get it. It wasn't going to further my career in any way. It wasn't going to change my career trajectory in any way. But I did it for my own self-effication. If you're going to do it for that, if you want to do it to develop yourself or to be better at what you do, I'm all for it. But at 18, 17 years old, you don't know what you do or don't like to do. So for years, I have said there should be a law that people can't even go to college until they're 23. They should have some life experience. They should have some work experience. They should know what they like to do and don't like to do and the kinds of people they like and don't like and what their own personality says about them. I'm very happy sitting in an office by myself. There's tons of people I've talked to that said, I don't know how you do that, Nanette. Like, you should know that before you pursue a degree and a career.
I'm sure that background has made it a lot easier for you to adapt to the current COVID situation, right?
Yes, my life hasn't changed a bit.
I know. I have been working online for quite a few years, and I just feel like my life hasn't changed that much. But I so agree. Just on this show, a very important message I want to send to fellow parents is that college is one of the many ways to succeed in life. It's not the only way. So I really want to disrupt, to challenge that perspective. It is so fascinating to hear that you have been an entrepreneur for almost 3 decades before this thing is so glamorized, right? So I just love that. Such a pioneer. So I want to ask you a little bit, like go a little bit more specific. So what do you think are exactly wrong with today's education? And also share your perspective on exams and grades with us.
All right, I will speak to elementary education because I think that's where we have the ability to influence somebody's choices later in life. And my answer actually covers both of your questions. So I think the number one thing that's wrong with education is that all we do is test people. And if you're not a good test taker, you really limit your ability to be successful, which makes no sense whatsoever because there's all different kinds of smart and there's all different kinds of capabilities. And for society to say, everybody must be able to achieve this level on a test is kind of ludicrous because a test is only one measure. And yet, we're asking everybody to either meet that measure or not meet that measure. And I think what requiring everybody to test and holding it's not only that, it's just holding those test scores. Like schools are determined to be successful or not based on their aggregate test scores, which is also ludicrous. You should at least be massaging that test to align with the capabilities of the people taking it. Like, for instance, even in the workplace, I often do testing because it's a sometimes legal requirement to be certified to say, well, if this person's going to go off and do this job, we have to attest to the fact that they understand it. But even in the world of adult learning, there's people who can't take tests. And so I have to design different ways for them to still prove that they understand the content. And it doesn't have to be a paper or pencil thing. But what we've done, what the aftermath or the bigger picture problem is with testing, in my opinion, for younger people and how that has now translated to the workplace and why I think a lot of organizations are struggling is we have trained young people to believe that there's only one right answer because that's what a test forces you to do is figure out the right answer. And I think that is so detrimental to life skills and to companies, because one of the things that companies are saying now is the number one, top 5 skills they need in people is creativity. Well, you drilled that out of them for the last 17 years while they were in college or while they were in elementary school by saying, just find the right answer and you will do well if you can tell me what the right answers are. And we all know as adults in life, there's no one right answer. You have to be expansive in your thinking, and we're not teaching young people to be expansive.
Totally. I mean, like, I taught in the classroom for 10 plus years before I resigned. I worked with students who are some of them, they're so good at taking exams, like kind of figure me out, what do I want, and really score really high on those exams, but they don't know how to implement them, right? And then you have students who are doing really well, they know how to implement them, but as you mentioned, they don't know how to do the exam thing. So it's really, really interesting. I think if we want to improve the quality of education, we really have to develop some like better assessment systems to better evaluate our students. And I love how you mentioned about self skills, creativity. And last week, I think we shared on the show, there was actually a big Adobe study just came out a few weeks ago, and it's called the deciding factor. So in that study, they highlighted, actually like GPA scores, SAT test scores are not as important as what parents and students and teachers are actually thinking about in terms of being accepted into college. But creativity, creative problem solving, those are the skills that are highly valued, but many students they don't have. Yeah. So your doctorate is actually in adult learning, like how people learn. And I think that is really fascinating because I feel like as a parent, as a teacher, as a trainer, we all need to learn how people learn. And I was like, why I never learned that when I was in my PhD program. Yeah, and you spent quite a few years like doing this, and I know this is going to be a big question, but I wonder if you can kind of summarize some of the key like takeaways that you learned from your doctorate in terms of how people learn. So share some insights, share some takeaways with us in terms of how people learn.
Sure. I actually made a couple of notes so I could answer this question. So the first and foremost way that people learn is through experience. Mm-hmm. And I wrote an article a few years ago called "Don't Touch That Stove, It's Hot." The premise of the article is that you can tell a young person, toddlers walking towards a stone, don't touch that, it's hot. Be careful, you'll get hurt. Watch out, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
What does any of that mean? Hot, hurt, dangerous. I don't understand what any of that means. But when I touch the stove, I go, oh, I get it. And I'll never do that again, right? Now, and obviously, there's a lot of situations where we don't want our child to experience the bad after effects, but extrapolate that to everything. The things that we internalize and we understand and we can act on or replicate are things that we've learned through experience. And that's not how education is structured. Education is structured to memorize this and repeat it back to me on a test that has a limited number of choices for answers anyway. I mean, one of the reasons I have many advanced degrees is because I'm very good at taking tests, and most people are very poor at designing tests. I actually designed a course to teach trainers how to design tests because they just make them so obvious to the participant that there's, in my opinion, there's no way you couldn't pass it. But anyway, okay, I digress. So first thing is through experience. The second thing is through repeated and spaced practice. So think about when you learn to ride a bike. You didn't just hop on the bike and go, yep, got that. It takes a long time to understand the balance and the momentum and how to stay in your lane on the roadway and all sorts of motor skills and thinking skills to be successful at riding a bike. And you didn't do that on the first try. And you learned it repeatedly over the course of your childhood, because at first you started with a tricycle, which got the motor skills down, but didn't get the balance down. And then you graduated to a bigger bike, which got a little bit of balance down because you could still fall over. And then you graduated to the bike that had no training wheels. And now it's all in your control. So over the years, practicing the same skill over and over, you perfected it as it got a little bit tougher and a little bit tougher. Now we hop on a bike and we don't even think about what we're doing, and we can't even remember how we learned it. But you can extrapolate that again to learning all sorts of things, which is why, even though I work in the field of training, I don't believe in sending people to training classes, because you can't teach somebody in 4 hours or 7 hours how to do anything, right? You can make them familiar with it. You can tell them about stuff, but you can't get them to change their behavior without consistent and spaced practice. They have to have time to practice and reflect on it and practice again. And so the third key there is reflection, where people have to say, what did I do? Did that work in my favor? Did that not work in my favor? Could I change that outcome if I changed my behavior? in some other way? Did I have a good outcome or a bad outcome? Would I want this to happen again? I mean, those are things we go through lightning speed in our heads, but we could also ask children pointedly, so how did that go for you? And would you do something differently in the future? The difference between how adults learn and how children learn is that children don't have the capacity for reflection until they're probably preteens, and sometimes even, older, there's 10-year-olds who are super mature and 10-year-olds who are not super mature. So that is dependent on every individual, but reflection is really the way that you learn, because then you're saying, what did I experience? What was in my control? How do I interact in this way again in the future? And you start to internalize all of that and then raise your skill level.
Wow, I love this. Those 3 points are so powerful. And I so agree with you regarding the importance of, reflection. Actually, because we homeschool our children, right? I'm kind of walking the talk because I'm disappointed in the educational system. So we decided to take charge of our children's own education. So my 9 years old, so since he started 8, so we have actually been doing reflection with him. It's so fascinating to see the aha on his face when we are actually doing the guided reflection. We ask him a question, what was surprising about what you have learned, and he will share something with us. I feel like, as you mentioned, that is when he is actually internalizing the knowledge. So I think it's really interesting you said, as a trainer, how did you phrase it? You phrase it so well. Are you saying that you think learning doesn't really happen inside the training space, but actually happens after the training is over, when they go home or go to work, when they are actually practicing and reflecting? That's when they start to kind of understand what the training is about. I just want to paraphrase that, because that is so counterintuitive, because most of the time, even for me, professional development is go to a 3-hour training, right? Or go to a conference. You think you check the box, I did the training, but after that is over, oftentimes I just return everything to the trainer. Yeah.
So for years, I've been part of the problem for years, so I'm embarrassed by that. But for a good 20 years, I designed training for companies, and they then delivered it to their employees. And, my role in the process was being an expert in how adults learn. And I've even niched that down to how adults learn in the workplace, because we don't have a lot of time to take people off the job and put them into training. And so the things that I created, I tried to make as beneficial as possible to the learners. But I will say that I've always made this analogy that most training classes are like a flight attendant. When you leave, they go, bye, good luck. Hope that works out for you. I'm never going to see you again, because we don't follow people onto the job after training. We don't see them putting it into practice. There's no coaching generally. It's a one and done class, and one and done doesn't work. Some people will get it. You and I would probably get it, because we've had years of training ourselves to think about things that are presented to us and how that might affect us. But we are we're snowflakes in terms of how most people are capable of learning from a training class. For most people, that's an introduction to information. And even if you were to put them into a contrived, activity where you say, okay, say we're teaching closing costs in a sales training class. All right, I want you to practice with another person, and here's a script you can follow to close the sale. Well, that's completely contrived. There's no way in the real world that conversation is going to go the same way. You do not put enough variables in there for that person to really think, be able to think, what did I just learn and how do I implement it? All you're asking them to do is practice in a probably with a script in a contrived situation. So you can see why people leave training and don't actually implement what they've learned on the job, because it didn't sink in. And one opportunity, and we also do that a lot, which is unfortunate. We go, okay, let's have one practice activity. Good. Now you know how to close a sale. Goodbye. Good luck. And we
it's such a great point. I hope everyone is really taking in what Nanette shared with us, because I think because of that, I cannot even feel hesitant to go to conferences. I feel like some of the conferences, almost all of the conferences that I attended in the past, I felt like I learned so much when I was at the conference, taking notes, this and that. But after I came back home, just like nothing was implemented. Nothing, very few items on my list was implemented. It is not a very effective way. You sat through so many sessions, like over 2-day period, and just like you don't have enough like workshop sessions, like coaching sessions working with you as opposed to lecture over you. I think that needs to be like disrupted for sure. Yeah.
And so that's why most training doesn't work, is because we don't follow them to the job. Even if you did a one and done class and then said, in a week, we're going to have a follow-up Q&A to just answer any questions you've had because you've had a chance to implement it, but we don't do that. So you can't leave people to learn on their own. It's not effective.
That's a great tip for all the people joining us live right now who are entrepreneurs who are creating online classes, do a webinar and actually have a follow-up Q&A. So I think that is a lot more effective. We got some really great comments from our live audience. Kevin said, the way you get experience is by making mistakes. I so agree. And when you go back to the education topic, right, our students are so afraid of making mistakes. And thank you for joining us live. There's actually a great question from Pooja and joining us live from India. Really excited to see you again, my friend. And she asked, how can a child talk to their parents about his or her passion? Because I think most of the young people hesitate to talk to them, which is a quite common universal issue. Yeah. So what do you think?
I think the parent just has to initiate the conversation then and say, let's talk about what you did this week that you thought was fun or interesting or you'd like to learn more about, because children aren't great at starting conversations. I don't know that they're hesitant to talk about what they're passionate about. They're just not great at starting conversations. And sometimes they're not great at continuing the conversation either.
That's true.
But I think that's a great, conversation to have once a week at the dinner table is, so, what did you do this week that you found fun and interesting? And is that something you'd like to pursue? I have to say, my own mother was so good at allowing me to pursue anything that I was interested in, and also to allow me to drop out of anything I wasn't interested in, which I don't think a whole lot of parents do. I think it's like, hey, if you join the soccer team, you're going to stay here through the whole season, or, we bought you all this equipment, so we've got a sunk cost, and you've got to, do your part to help us. Hello. But I had a great mother in that she let me try so many things. I tried sports, I tried music, I tried academics, all extracurricular type of things. And the thing that is most attractive to me is the academics. I really like learning things. That to me is exciting. But I know that that's just my personal experience.
I think that's a good implication for parents, right? Like often as parents, that we are projecting our own like aspirations, like dreams and hopes that we didn't have a chance to accomplish in life, and we're projecting that into our own children. And I catch myself all the time doing that. I think being a mom has definitely helped me to reflect on like what I do and how to be a better mom. And also I think we need to like shift away from like I'm the mom or I'm the dad, I'm the expert, like as a dictator, but move to more like a facilitator, right? I facilitate, I have conversations with my children all the time, not just like once a week or once a month, but actually always in that like flow of conversation to facilitate them, to support them, show up as a facilitator, so you can actually build that trust with our own children, like as opposed to be like, sage on the stage. So I want to,
Can I share another anecdote with you though? Because this is something else that my mother did that, upon reflection was fabulous. My mother never said no. She encouraged us to research. So I remember when my sister was 12, 13, she wanted a deer as a pet. My mother didn't say that's ridiculous, nobody gets a deer as a pet. My mother said, well, research what it will take for us to have a deer as a pet. Is there zoning regulations about how much land you need? And does a deer need a mate? And she made my sister do all this research to the point where my sister said, well, I'm not going to have a deer. But I thought that was really brilliant, because instead of saying no, then all you have is that kid constantly saying, I want a deer, I want a deer, I want a deer. And if you say that maybe that's possible, why don't you get back to me and tell me if it's possible? She took all the pressure off of herself and put it back on the kid. But that teaches the kid research and logic and reasoning and being able to make an argument. If they thought, if she came up in the end and said getting a deer is a good idea, she would have had to have an argument. It teaches all sorts of skills.
Oh, I love that. That's a great idea, which is actually a reoccurring theme on this show. Almost all the parents and educators I interviewed, they always said, can you go figure this out, right? Instead of giving them an answer, especially when the answer is no, actually let them draw that conclusion. I love that. I'm going to implement this.
Back in the 70s, it wasn't as easy to do research.
That's true. Oh, you might be so amazing. I'm sure, like, you mentioned that you have been an entrepreneur for so many years. Was that like strange for you? Because back then, I don't think this was a thing, right? Being a freelancer, entrepreneur, was that hard for your parents to accept? Hey, I'm not going to find a job. I'm just going to be my own boss.
Well, I had a job for a couple of years.
Okay.
So there's three things, really. One, my father was self-employed. So that was the model that I saw. Two, I did have a job for a short period of time, which is when I learned that I love training people. I like to see that light bulb go off over their heads. So that was useful. And then third, I got laid off from that job. And my knee-jerk reaction was, that's never going to happen to me again. So since I was able to collect unemployment for a whole year, that was the recession of the early 90s, and everybody was unemployed. So they extended it for much longer than they had in the past. I had the luxury of starting my business while basically I had an income, not big, but I had an income coming in. And I always knew I was going to be self-employed. When I got laid off, they sent me for outplacement counseling, which was great. And the counselor said to me, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And I said exactly what, my self-employment plan was. And he said, if you already know this is what you want to do, why aren't you doing it now? And I said, because I'm too young. And he said, who told you that? And I said, me. It was just in my head. At 25 years old, you shouldn't be starting your own business. And he's like, well, that's just a limiting belief. You just made that up. And so I said, okay, well, then I'm going to become self-employed now because I know exactly what I want to do. And of course, it's morphed over the 30 years. I've always stayed in the field of educating adults, but what I actually do is morphed about 4 times.
Yeah, I love this. I love this. Yeah, so everyone is loving this idea that you shared about like the deer, right? Ask them to make requests into research projects. Such a brilliant idea that we can all implement right away. So
Thanks,
here,
Mom. That was my idea.
yeah, great mom. Yeah, and so here is a great question from Dan, and so he's asking, what if the parents doesn't really have any leadership skills or experience, and how can they approach this with their own children and to help their children cultivate and develop this skill if the parent doesn't really have the skill?
That's a great question. And how many parents really do have leadership experience? They certainly, vast majority do not, when you think about how many people are leaders of any kind. And most people who have children have them early in their life before they would have even ascended to a leadership position. So I don't think that has anything to do with it, whether you've had leadership experience or not. Creating a sense of independence, yes, absolutely. Helping and allowing kids to figure things out on their own, explore the things that they're interested in. But the other crux for me is helping people to see the big picture, which nobody teaches you to do. Again, because in elementary school, we say, hey, there's one answer, right? Look for the one answer. But there's just so many things in life that I overhear people discussing, and I think, well, that's such a limiting view. Again, you don't get the big picture. You haven't looked at the other side of that argument. So I think to add to the independence and the pursuing what you love, the third thing I would say is ask questions that encourage your child to see things outside of their own perspective, because so many people can't see outside of their own perspective. They can't change a perspective. So when I design training for adults, I often use that as a learning technique, because I don't want them to think, this is our company and this is the way we do things. I want them to understand, why do we do things this way? So for instance, years ago, I did a project for Marriott hotels, and my audience was the managers and the directors of facilities. So the folks who oversaw basically the maintenance crews at each of the hotels. So that seems like a weird audience for me, right? How does that align with what I do at all? But their biggest problem that they reported to me was, I have to constantly supervise people. I have to constantly give them the answers. They can't make their own decisions. They don't make a move without my input. And, that limits what I can get done in a day. And I said, so what you need to do is teach them to be more independent and to think on their own. And so when they call you and say, I've just finished this plumbing repair, come and tell me what you think. You come there and you say to them, what do you think? Tell me why you thought this through. Why did you choose this repair? And then you say, what do you think the inspector is going to say? Because these were hotels that were being built. So obviously everything had to have a certificate of occupancy. So, all right, it's not just enough that you did a good job, in my opinion. What is the inspector going to look for? Is this going to get us a certificate of occupancy or not? So I taught the facilities managers to teach their people to think bigger picture. What's the other perspective? It's not just the job that you're doing. It's how that job is viewed in the bigger picture.
I love this, seeing the bigger picture, and also, goes back to parenting. Actually explain to our children why they're doing what they are doing, so they actually see the big picture. I think even in organizations, right? I think there is so much research showing that if the organization's employees, they know the bigger picture, they know their why they are doing what they are supposed to do, overall performance of the organization is doing much better. So I kind of want to shift our focus a little bit. You have been designing online training for quite a few years, 15 years in fact, and then you shifted your attention to like training, doing leadership training for millennials and Gen Z. I'm curious, what was the turning point that inspired this shift?
Okay, a couple of points of clarification. So I was actually designing training for other companies for 20 years before I made the shift. And at that 20-year point, I realized I am part of the problem. I am teaching people to learn things in one way and not to be expansive in their thinking. So in 2015, I wrote a book called Future Proofing Your Organization by Teaching Thinking Skills, because that's really, to me, the solution is you have to teach people how to be better thinkers. And we don't teach that. We don't encourage that through all the things that I've mentioned in our first 30 minutes. And then as an offshoot of that, I realized kind of simultaneously that the boomers are leaving. That's when all the U.S. Census data came out about the boomers are going to leave by 2030. And I thought, my gosh, the audiences that I've been working for in corporate America for 20 years, we're really not teaching leadership to the younger generations. Mm-hmm. And when all the boomers leave, those companies are going to fall off a precipice because they didn't get younger people prepared. What companies tend to do is wait until they've promoted somebody to a leadership role and then give them leadership development, which is ludicrous because now they've been practicing something 10, 15, 20 years one way, and now you're asking them to change their behavior. And the hardest thing to get somebody to do is change their behavior. So that's one problem. The second problem is what companies tend to do. Bigger companies, Fortune 500 companies, tend to choose who the hypos are. So they pick and choose. Like I worked for an organization that every year we brought in 300 people as our hypos, and we put them through a 14-week development process because those were the people who were expected to be the future leaders. Well, I always make the analogy that's like planting your garden in the spring and deciding that of your 15 tomato plants, only those 3 are going to make it. That makes no sense. Like, why are you not developing and cultivating all 15 of your plants? And it's only going to benefit you if they all rise to the occasion, right? So I've been arguing now for many years with companies that you need to train everybody in leadership skills. And that doesn't mean I'm training you to be a leader. I'm training you in the skills that a leader needs, like critical thinking and creativity and working collaboratively and making better decisions and being able to present your ideas verbally and written. There's people can't do that. That's what surveys over and over, what are companies missing in skills in their employees, and all those things come up. So why are you waiting until a special time in that person's life to give them those skills? And the other detriment of waiting until you promoted somebody to leadership and then teaching them leadership skills is now it's just too much. It's like sensory overload. It's cognitive overload. You're asking them to change their behavior and also step up to new functional responsibilities, which they've never had before. So which you can't do both of those things at the same time. So which do you think is going to win? It's the thing that is going to show up in my performance review, which is the functional responsibilities, not my ability to communicate with my staff.
Yeah. Oh my God. Those are really great reasons. I think that resonated really with what you mentioned, right? Like you are here starting a new job. Not only do you have to familiarize yourself with the organizational culture and also learn the functional skills, as you mentioned, but also at the same time, we're asking for behavioral change. We all know that's the hardest to change. So yeah. So that is what we shouldn't do. I'm also curious, do you think, going back to what we mentioned earlier, do you think our current education model, to what extent and in what aspect is actually contributing to this failure, failure in helping our children develop those important leadership skills, soft skills, as you mentioned?
Yeah, no, it completely contributes to it. In fact, I have said to many educators in higher ed, once you release your students to me, I have to teach them how to actually learn. Like you're just giving me a problem. You haven't, just because they came out of college, you haven't given me any help in terms of training them to do anything. First of all, I have to train them in their job skills because education doesn't teach that. It teaches everything in theory, unless you hopefully encourage people to take internships. But secondly, they don't know how to learn. Like I have a friend who is the professional development director for the 8th largest law firm in America. And she says once they get their new attorneys out of law school, they spend 2 to 3 years and $200,000 per attorney to teach them how to be lawyers, because they didn't learn any of those actual on-the-job skills while they were in law school. And I will extrapolate that to the workplace as well. It does feeding people into the workplace from learning in the theory there's just a complete disconnect. There's just a complete disconnect.
Totally. I mean, I read so many studies talking about how expensive it is to actually onboard a fresh college grad, teaching them to unlearn. That's a big part, right? Unlearn what they have learned and then relearn what actually works in real life. Really interesting. There was like a quote from Toffler, a futurist. He said that the illiterate of the 21st century is not those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So I love that. Just like, yeah. So can you share with us some, like, we see the importance of cultivating and developing those leadership skills since day one, right? So that's your approach. So can you give us some like ideas or exercises and or maybe even resources that we can actually use and start? Many people here are young emerging professionals and parents watching us live. So something that we can start implementing now.
I will say the number one thing I recommend at the business level and at the young person level is reading, and reading for comprehension. Mm-hmm. People don't know how to read anymore. Mm-hmm. People don't take the time to read anymore, but also the way that we present, society presents information feeds into that. And I was startled to learn that when I was the head of the PTA for my children's middle school, and we worked in conjunction with a local university to test 7th graders' ability to read and comprehend. So from a doctoral student perspective, I was like, this is great. We get to do research with our 7th graders. But what I found out is young people just skim. They don't read for comprehension. And that's probably linked to you have to find the one right answer, right? So they just skim for main concepts or bolded words or what the caption is under the picture. But then to ask them, so what are the 3 things you took away from that? Dumbfounded. They didn't take anything away. They're waiting for you to prompt them to, short-term memory recall the one answer that they should come back with. So I would teach young people, and this is going to help them in their adult life as well, but if I had to do one activity, I would teach young people to read and read for comprehension. Mm-hmm. And, if that starts with books that they're interested in, like mystery novels or whatever, that's fine, but work them up to reading the newspaper. Like I always read the newspaper as a kid. It was startling to me to learn that people didn't read the newspaper, but then have, conversations with your kids about what they've read and what it means to them. Again, you don't have to correct them or tell them, you didn't interpret that correctly. Just let them start processing out loud. What does this mean? And then as they get older, they have to read comparatively. Mm-hmm. So first you just want them to be able to read and understand and paraphrase back what they've learned, because in paraphrasing, we know that they've understood it. They're not just parroting it, but then they have to be able to read comparatively. So as they get older and they can handle more difficult reading subjects, ask them to read, 2 articles from 2 different publications. And that could be, again, with their interests, science or robotics or technology or whatever. For me, it would be business. And then how do those 2 authors or those 2 researchers, what do they do similarly? What do they do differently? Because we don't teach people to think big picture. F. Scott Fitzgerald said, the mark of intelligence is the ability to hold 2 distinct ideas in the brain at the same time and still be able to function.
I love that.
We're not teaching people how to do that. So they think this is it, and I can't be open to any other interpretation. I can't be open to any other information. I have found the answer. This is my answer, and I'm sticking to it. And I think that's why we have a lot of political strife and otherwise in the world right now, because people see things from one perspective. So if you get them to start reading for comprehension and then reading comparatively so that they can say, well, this author had some good points, ones I agree with and disagree with. This author also had good points, ones I agree with and disagree with. I'm actually thinking of doing a blog post or a Facebook Live or something, because I have so many leadership books behind me. And the point I want to make is none of those authors is wrong. They all have their own perspective and take on what leadership looks like. And it would be silly for me to choose one author and say, okay, now I know everything there is about leadership. I have to constantly be reading and thinking about it and putting my own thoughts out there about what does leadership in business look like, because that's how you have big picture thinking. That's how you're seen as a person who is a good leader, because you've got big perspective. So it doesn't have to be on the topic of leadership. That's my passion. But whatever your topic is, you need to be well-rounded. So especially for young people, the easiest thing to do is to get them to be able to read for comprehension and then to read comparatively.
I love this. And I also think, like sometimes I ask my own children, because I grew up in different country, and I will actually ask my children to, okay, this is this piece of news. Can you actually see how other countries are actually reporting this piece of news? You can really see the political agenda, just like history book, just like when you look at map, different countries produce different versions of map, right? To make my country look bigger. It is so interesting when you give them that comparative perspective, and they can also cultivate critical thinking. And I also love how you mentioned, right? Like I think social media also contributes to this. We are on social media. Most people who are following me are kind of against education. So every day I'm like being reinforced by my own ideas and beliefs. I don't really see, the algorithm doesn't really show me like radically different perspectives. It's just like, it doesn't work like that. So, and I know in your book, you also talked about Google search. So maybe you can kind of elaborate on that, how Google and social media kind of combined are making us, more stupid.
Yes. So there was an article in the Atlantic magazine, I forget how many years ago now, a long time ago, and it was called, "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" And the answer is yes. And the problem with Google, which is wonderful for many, many, many things, so I'm not disparaging Google, but the problem with the algorithms and how Google functions is that when you type in a query, it brings you back the most popular queries, the most popular answers. So the number of people who said, that's the response I'm going to read, bumps up its popularity. So what happens is we're all reading the same things, because how many of us go to page 2? I never. Yeah, exactly, never. And there might be fabulous information on page 5, but it's not the most popular. So to your point about social media and skewing things the way who's ever disseminating that information wants it skewed, Google's doing the same thing. We're all believing the same information because we're all looking at the same information. So for me anyway, I actually employ a researcher who loves what she does because research takes so much time. And so whenever I want to take a stand on something in my field, I say to her, this is the premise I'm trying to put out there. Go find me the research that backs it up or doesn't back it up. And she'll find it for me in popular press and in academics, which is great. She actually is a full-time librarian at a college, and she does this for me on the side. So she has access to all the academic journals. And I make sure that I am well researched before I put anything out there. And, sometimes, again, the premise is in my head because I see it in popular press, and then I read the research and I say, wow, that's not true at all. And then that becomes my platform is, this is actually not true. Let me tell you what the research has shown. That's the kind of stuff that makes my heart sing.
That's very interesting. And now I even reflect on my own behavior. Like on Google, I don't even go to the second page or fifth page. Even on the first page, I only look at maybe the top 3 article. Oftentimes it's like the first article because, I just feel like I don't have time. Okay, this is what I want. And so I think everyone watching this should do a challenge, actually do a more thorough research, right?
Right.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah. So here is a really great comment from Pooja, said that in India, going back to what we're talking about, only on academic grades until high school. I feel like this is pretty universal. I think in the US, there is also a big emphasis, maybe not to that extent, but still most parents I talk to, they're like always about GPA, academic performance, and really interesting. Yeah.
Again, I'll tell you, my mother was an educator. So whatever she learned in terms of being an educator worked for her. But her perspective was always just do the best that you can. Mm-hmm. And all of us were in National Honor Society, but nobody made us do that, right? It was just the best that we can. And I know that whenever my kids got a poor grade, I wouldn't admonish them for the poor grade. I would just say, I know you're capable of doing more than this. Let's figure out what you're not doing. Like we had one that just refused to do homework. That was his downfall. He was super smart. He is super smart, but refused to do the homework.
I mean, what I did discover is that learning is personal, right? Like every kid learns very differently. Just like we all love different types of food. So I think that is another thing with
great analogy.
Yeah, like with like 300 students in a class. I used to teach classes like 300 students, 400 students. It's not really learning, just like regurgitating information. I also want to clarify, when you're talking about reading, are you talking about right now so much is happening online? So are you advocating for like Kindle, like online, or you still recommend the kind of the old fashioned way of actually holding a book? I think that is something very important that everyone really needs to get this.
I am so glad you said that because that was part of my response and I left it out. So what we learned from our studies with the 7th graders is not only do they not read, they skim, but neurologically, it is hard to comprehend when you're reading online because you can't go back and say, wait a minute, what? It's hard when you're scrolling. It's a whole different process than reading on paper. So you're absolutely right. You have to read in print.
I love this because, I was also doing research on this and I found exactly the same thing. And also we kind of force our children, they don't want to do it, but we force them to do cursive writing. So what I learned is that when you are typing, you are only using one side of your brain. But when you are actually doing cursive writing, you are actually activating both atmospheres of your brain. And to me, that is so important, especially as our children are growing, not just like typing everything, but actually using their hand, their muscle, activating both sides of the brain. It's so sad that like now when I see so many children are just learning ABC, everything through their iPad, whatever device they use.
Right. And writing makes you internalize it. Because it's so much of a slower process and you have to think through sentence structure and grammar. And by the time you think all that through, you've actually internalized it better than typing. My handwriting is horrendous because I type a lot.
The club. Yeah.
What I learned when I was in college is I listen better when I'm typing my notes out. For whatever reason, that might just be the way my brain works. But if I have to handwrite my notes, it's like my brain stops listening so I can do this activity. But if I'm typing, it just flows right through me. So I was like the only student who brought, the 30-pound laptop when they first came out to my classes. And then everyone would ask me for my notes.
That's impressive. I like, if I go to a conference, I actually typing because it's just faster, easier for me to organize this. But I do agree that if I want to really comprehend the information, it's much better. I actually write it down, paraphrasing, using my own words. Yeah. So as we were talking about academic performance, we're just wrapping up. What a fascinating conversation. I have so many questions I want to ask, but I do want to share screen real quick because everyone is talking about kind of score, education, academic performance. So this is the Adobe study. And if you are interested, I can share the link with you. It's called Deciding Factor. So they listed the important skills like creativity, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creative problem solving. Those are the important skills that our students need to be future ready, but many of them don't really have. It's a big study. And but this is the fascinating part I want to share with everyone. It's like really, here, skills like creativity and communication have become more important in terms of college admission. Everyone thinks like score, SAT, as you can see, is actually lower. But what are important is actually interview skills. I find that most students I talk to, they just cannot communicate.
Right.
And homeschoolers will be better, but as you can see, skills and all those things really, really fascinating. It's not like top number one GPA or SAT, but all those important core soft and leadership skills. I just want to really share this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of to wrapping up this year, by the way, feel free to check out Dr. Nanette, her website. I have been sharing on the screen. So earlier we talked about this a little bit, but I do want to ask you right now, there's online classes, Zoom classes. And what I learned is that if we're asking our children to watch pre-recorded videos, self-paced, self-directed, and actually research has shown the completion rate for such classes is as low as 15%, very low. I struggle with just if I'm taking class, no human interaction, pre-recorded. So I wonder if you can explain to us the reason behind it. So why the completion rate for such, pre-recorded, self-directed, self-paced learning courses are so low?
It's simply my opinion, but I never recommended a client to use online learning because people are not self-directed. People don't have the discipline to sit there through whatever length of time and do the work. We're easily distracted. We're nowadays very good at multitasking, especially with our smartphones. Everybody's doing a smartphone and something else, right? Which I purposely don't do that. I leave my smartphone outside of my office, outside of my bedroom. It's almost never near me. It's, for me, it's actually take it out of the house. I don't use it for many purposes. But if you want to have really engaging online learning, that's an expensive endeavor because you have to put a lot of bells and whistles and stimuli, and you've got to have people, constantly clicking and thinking and answering. And the programming behind that is super intense and very expensive. So my argument to my clients has always been, I don't want to do e-learning because the completion rates are abysmal, because comprehension is not where it's at, because people learn better with other people. That is why learning in a group works. People learn more when they're working collaboratively with others. So if I'm doing something self-study and I hit an impasse, who do I ask for help? And I just go, oh, well, I didn't get that. I'll just move along. And if the rest builds on that, you're absolutely at a loss. So it's much better to have instructor-led or having people work together in groups where they can share their ideas. Because even if you do a brainstorming activity, that's a simple example. I can only come up with so many uses for a paperclip on my own. But if you put three of us together, we're going to come up with a much bigger list. So there's only so much I can do to educate myself. I have to be with other people to really understand and internalize information. I honestly think the poor completion rates just because they're boring, and to make them less boring would cost too much money.
I agree. I don't know if you know this. My favorite learning kind of model is 70-20-10. So what that model talks about is for every major transformation to happen, only 10% of that transformation comes from formal learning, watching a video, reading a book. 20% is actually social learning, exactly what you have just shared with us, that discussion, talking to coaches, mentors, and 70% is actually experiential learning, learning through application. But I just feel like traditional training and traditional school learning, we only focus on the 10%. No wonder it doesn't really work. Right. And so here I saw a question earlier. There was someone asked you, and I think that was really great question. As we're wrapping this up, I want to ask, and hold on, let me try to, I think he was asking you, what is your biggest challenge? And hold on, let me find it. Because we got so many comments, and I literally, here. So what is your biggest success and your biggest challenge in your life so far? And I want to expand on this question and to share with us, Nanette. And reflecting on your life and success, what do you think are some really important hard skills and soft skills that you have developed along the way that really help you get to where you are today?
Wow.
That's a big wrap this up.
I would say my biggest success is being self-employed and doing that for 30 years, because there's not a lot of folks who can do that. And now that everybody works from home, when people say, my gosh, you've worked from home for 30 years, I say, yes, I invented it.
I love it.
But like you said, years ago, that was not a thing to be a freelancer. I just have this internal motivation to be self-directed. And I think that's why I was able to finish a doctorate, because a lot of people, are ABD. But I set a goal and I worked towards it. So I think in terms of success, just being self-employed and making the pivot, that's a new word, but I've done it four times in my almost 30 years, is just, going where the need for adult education and adult learning is going. My biggest challenge was probably finishing my doctorate. And I tell people, my niece works in education. And a few years ago, she said to me, what school should I look at? I want to get a doctorate. And I said, don't do it. And I tell people all the time, yeah, high five, don't do it. A doctorate is a degree in perseverance, my friend told me once. I felt like the hoops that you have to jump through. I once had a paper returned because my table of contents wasn't aligned correctly. What does that have to do with what I'm learning? Exactly. Are you worried about the content of my paper or the fact that I don't have 16 dots before the page number? So it is a degree of perseverance. It is a degree of kowtowing, just hitting every mark the way that you're told to hit the mark. At the time that I got my doctorate, I wanted to become a college professor because I loved college so much. I wanted to give back and do that as a career. And at the time I got my doctorate, you could not teach college unless you had a doctorate. That's not the case anymore. Now you just have to have one degree higher than the people that you're teaching. So in retrospect, I would not have done that again. That was the biggest challenge. I was in an accelerated program and it took me 2 years longer than promised. But I am one of those people who completes what they start. It's not a valuable process in my mind, unless you're a scientist and you need to understand all of the deep research in order to be able to do your job. Then absolutely, I think you need a doctorate. But for my profession anyway, and so I did teach college actually for 6 years as an adjunct, and learned as an adjunct that there was no way I could do that full time. So again, people should have experience in life before they go and get degrees. They should know what they like and don't like.
Amen. You are just speaking my language. I totally agree. I think that's a major reason I left academia, because we have way too many academics teaching business, marketing, social media, PR, who don't really practice. We have no professionals in the teaching industry. I think that's a big mistake. Yeah. And anyone watching this right now or on replay, if you are pursuing a career in coaching, training, designing, and marketing business, I think a PhD is definitely not necessary. And even like an undergraduate degree, you have to think, choose carefully. Yeah.
But there's so many ways to get that same education and not have the
cheaper
anymore. And I think companies are becoming more comfortable with accepting small certificates of study. At least it shows that you have an interest and you pursued it and you were successful at it, which I think is more impressive as an employer than knowing that you got a degree that lockstepped you through it and you didn't have many decisions to make.
Amen. I mean, I do research on this all the time. I think the latest number is like 20 plus companies no longer require college degree, like Google, IBM, like Starbucks. And in fact, Google, they are launching their own career certifications to replace the 4-year college. I was like, yes, amen, finally. Yeah. Fascinating conversation. I want to respect your time and everyone's time. So do share with us, and where can we learn more about you, your books, your upcoming training? And so share with us and connect with you on LinkedIn. So all the good stuff.
Okay. Well, so you're scrolling at the bottom, the company website and my LinkedIn profile. So happy to connect with anybody. You can have access to my books on the website as well. There's Future-Proofing Your Organization by Teaching Thinking Skills. There's also a booklet that you can have for free, which is called 25 Activities to Develop Thinking Skills in Your Employees. I'm sorry, to develop leadership skills in your employees. And those are all basically conversation-based activities. I'm not 100% sure if you could morph them into working with young people. Yeah, you actually can't see the menu bar at the top there you go. Yeah, right there, books. There you go. Thank you. And then we do have an upcoming workshop starting at the end of this month, which is helping companies to define who their leaders are going to be come 2021, because what's now happened in society is there's a lot of boomers leaving the workforce now. Or before that was a crisis that was coming in 2030, and it's happening now because companies are furloughing, they're laying off, they're reducing employee counts, which makes sense. There's no debating that they're doing the right thing, but who are they getting rid of but the people who make the most money? So it's not funny. I don't know why I just laughed there. So who's going to be left? My worry is who's going to be left to run companies as they regroup and they start to regrow, and they got rid of all the leaders who had been on the job for years and have the culture and the understanding of how that company works and what the priorities of that company are. We have now a much younger generation of workers who haven't had the time on the job. And as we said at the beginning of the hour, nobody was invested in teaching them leadership skills. So I think companies are really about to hit a challenge.
So I mean, we don't have time now. I'm so passionate about this because then when you look at all the students, the training they receive is so siloed, it's so specialized. Like after I got my PhD, I was so niche. Like nobody has any idea what I was talking about. Maybe there are 10 people studying this. It's so specialized, and I think, I so agree with you. You need
companies do that too. Even if they give training, which is not the majority of companies, but if they do give employee training, they keep them in silos. So everybody's creating specialists and nobody's creating generalists.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a great takeaway. What a great punchline for everyone. We have quite a few young people here, learn a broader skill, right? How to run business, not just like in your immediate discipline, but actually a broader, we were also talking about earlier. Yeah. I don't want to repeat. Anyway, amazing conversation. Yes, Lance, I agree. Excellent conversation. And thank you so much, everyone. And Nanette for dropping so much value, and everyone for joining us live, literally from all over the globe. I love seeing you guys, and have a great weekend. And make sure to bookmark your calendar. I hope to see you again next Friday or Saturday, same time, same location. And those of you who requested the links to download the Adobe study, I will make sure to send it to you through a private DM on LinkedIn. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Pleasure.